I wanted to share a couple ideas on how I've sort of gone about putting in plantings in the past few years, and how some of it is a little bit different than what I've read in books. I got a lot of ideas from friends, from books, from just observing what worked for me and what didn't. And one thing I wanted to talk about is density of plantings. Obviously, in this picture here, it's a little bit higher density than you would maybe be inclined to do if you were planting for the quote-unquote final density. There's a peach there, there's a yellow horn there, there's about 40 apricot, persimmon, honey locust, peach seedlings. There's pear seedlings in there as well. There's lupins, some garlics on the side, little apple seedlings, calendula, monarda, nicotiniana rustica, and then a border of comfrey. And there's honeyberries. And so you can, and then there's this thing, sea holly blue. So you can fit a whole ton in here. Why did I do this? Part of it is because I want to keep planting more trees everywhere, and my nursery kind of grew out of that desire to have tons of trees. I don't want to have to spend $30 on a peach tree and then be like hemming and hawing, where am I going to put it? Oh my God, what if it gets a disease? I just wanted to kind of have handfuls of trees and put them in everywhere and see what worked, so that it would be a little bit closer to, I don't know what's closer to a natural context of kind of throwing seeds all over the place and seeing what works where. But over the years, it certainly has become apparent that certain things really like certain areas that align with what I've read, and other things out of nowhere love a certain spot or love a certain relationship with other plants that I would have never anticipated. But I guess, so I'll leave this little garden here. It's connected to this bigger area. And again, here, there's a pear. This is a Scotia elderberry. And then there's a Juanita plum in there. And there's rhubarb on the ground and chicory. And I really don't know what that willow is doing in here. This is not its favorite spot. It's trying to get out of that area and lean over into the sun as much as it possibly can. And then it's all under this Japanese maple, and goes on into currants. There's some gooseberries in there, aronia, giant sunflower, a nice Reliance peach. This is an actual variety that I grafted, and herbaceous stuff all in there. And as you continue on, there's just more stone fruits. There's a persimmon back here. This is Prunus bassei, a little sand cherry. And getting a little hard to walk in here now. This is a nice seedling female persimmon, plum, into more elders, fennels, more plums, blackberry, Nanking cherry, which is in peak harvest window right now. And the point is that in this whole area, which is just a little east-facing garden on the south of the house, 5 years from now, there's no way all these plants can be here. That's fine. So if you want it to plant at the final density that things would be at, that the plants would live at, quote unquote, permanently, I really probably would have only been able to fit 3 or 4 trees in here maybe. And instead of that, there are probably 30 or 40. I don't even really know. And one of the major reasons why I do that now is, like I said, first of all, because I want to generate plant material that I may dig out of this area and then plant elsewhere. And then second of all, when you plant as densely as, for example, this scene here with the currants, the aronia, that's giant sunflower, comfrey, crabapple, that's a cherry right there. All of these things, there's echinacea, they're so close and there's enough mulch that for the rest of the whole season, the entire summer and all the way into fall, I probably won't have to do anything in here because there's really not enough light getting to the ground that any weeds, be they annuals or perennials, can really do much, because these plants have already taken up the space. I mean, in this location here with the rhubarb, you can't even see the ground on any level. There's some grass down there, but I'm really not going to worry about that. So if I had planted one tree here and another tree up there and another tree up there and one more up there, you'd have all this space in between that you'd have to manage somehow. And I think for a lot of gardeners, there's an attraction to do wider spacing so that you can just mow in between, have one mulched tree ring and then mowing in between. And in a certain sense, yeah, mowing can be sort of a low energy input mentally, but in terms of fossil fuel, it's very high. And in terms of time, it really does add up. I hate mowing. I still mow, but I really dislike it. And so now that I've got this density here, I basically don't have to do anything except maybe mulch a little bit, which would mean bringing 2 or 3 square bales of hay and just walking through and putting flakes down on any. I just put one on top of this grass, get rid of that. Even with perennial grasses, if you just keep mulching them out over the season, they'll sort of disappear. And I put in sweet potato slips to take over some of this newer space. And so the only mowable strip here left is this walkway, which I think I'm also going to actually get rid of maybe in the fall and just have the whole thing be a completely mulched garden, because the companion plants, the comfreys, all the herbaceous perennials, they take up the space so quickly and vigorously that there's just no room for other weeds, and the management becomes 100% productive. You're cutting back the comfrey, mulching the fruit trees, mulching any weeds with the comfrey, potentially harvesting yields from the comfrey. So there really isn't any just cutting grass to keep the grass short. Once we move up to here, this scenario is actually, in a pretty real sense, much more labor intensive to manage this, even though it looks simpler. And that's because all that's here is a few trees that are, still too close spacing for like a final planting. Like that is a chestnut, that is a chestnut, and that is a chestnut in the middle there. So all 3 of those can't become full 40-foot crown trees. But as I develop this area, I'm going to put more and more plants in, mulch around, so that I have to do less mowing. Because if I don't mow this grass here at least 3 times in the season, it really impedes these trees. All of these trees have been in the ground for, I think, well, pretty much all of them have been in the ground longer than the trees in that other first garden that we looked at. And same goes with these ones here. So the point being, heavy growth of grass really has a negative impact on trees. And that's not new information, but it's really significant. And I mean, this ring was probably mulched 4 or 5 times to get the tree to this height. But I find very much that in this context, with farther space between plants and less mulched ground, I have to do a lot more work. Mulching is heavy, but you really only have to do it every once in a while. And as long as you have a way of getting the mulch material close to the spot, I find it much easier than getting on the ground and ripping up perennial roots or anything like that. So the real point that I wanted to make here was planting really, really close and planting very stacked companion planting, I think, has many benefits. First of all, it more closely mirrors the ecological succession that that we have to go through to get to a forest. I mean, to take this grassy area, unfortunately, they stripped all the topsoil off of this area to make a pool before I came here. So that's why I put the planters here, because almost nothing grows here because it's so droughty. But to transition this away from what it is now and more into something like this, I have to plant super densely because it shades the ground, so I don't get nearly as much evaporation. This soil dries out so quickly compared to this. We've got lots of organic matter. Fungi are starting to run through the whole thing. I mean, you put a flake of hay down now and you pull it up a week later and it's already white underneath. And so this type of system has so much fungal and bacterial diversity in the soil now that it really feeds on itself and it helps the trees grow. Whereas here, if I were to just plant 2 or 3 or 4 trees, they would languish for years, which is in fact exactly what's happened. That chestnut there next to the hay bale, that's probably 7 years old. It's really not doing very much because it doesn't have enough companion planting. The soil gets too dry, and it just doesn't have as much available nutrient. You can see the yellow sheen to it. You look at these trees down here, and they don't have that. They have a much darker, well, the new growth on the elder is a little bit yellow, but that's different. The older leaves on these plants have a much darker green compared to this one. And so that really is about soil biology. Those plants are getting the nitrogen they need from the soil biology. I don't fertilize this at all. It's just the hay, and sometimes I pee on it a little bit, but not a lot. But I do that with all the trees. So anyway, planting densely has that benefit of jump-starting the ecology in the soil and above ground way faster. All these companion plants really do serve functions to help move along the system. And they keep the weeds down, and they all the plants that you use can have yields of whether it's food for the chickens over there, or whether they're medicinal, or whether they're edible, or whether they're just as a companion to help the tree along that you're hoping to harvest something off of. So, thank you. Anyway, I really, over the years, I've only been planting denser and denser, and it's very easy to come out here with pruners and make this look half as dense in an afternoon or 2 hours if I really wanted to. I don't want to do that, but it's much easier to thin things out than it is to deal with a system that doesn't have enough plant material in it. It just will languish and it simply won't produce yields nearly as quickly as planting a whole lot of plants together. And there certainly are a lot of considerations for which plant to put where, but those, I would truly say, are you can learn those as you go, with the mentality of just putting a lot of beneficial plants pretty close to each other. And this isn't perfect by any means. I mean, this blackberry is growing absolutely into this Nanking cherry. That probably could have been spaced out a little bit farther. That doesn't necessarily make any sense. I'm sure I'll see so many things over the years that I will say, oh wow, I wish I put that elderberry on the other side of that plum, or I wish I didn't put those two plums 7 feet next to each other because now I have to take one down. But in the meantime, I can get scionwood off of that, whatever it is. And if the plant costs you a whole lot of money, then yeah, you're not going to want to put in a whole lot of them. But if you have the wherewithal to throw some seeds in and start your own little nursery bed, little nursery bed by the house can provide you with enough plant material to plant out gardens, many gardens this size. So it's definitely worth putting aside 20 square feet of bed space in your garden for that. Maybe you'll miss a few salads that summer, but you'll have enough plant material to fill up gardens for future yields. Anyway, that was just some thoughts on high density planting and why I don't think you should be shy of doing it.